Welcome to our geoengineering age, Mellow Kat, Kat. So glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. There's a lot to talk about.
There is. We'll plunge right in. So before we get to your work around geoengineering, Kat, can you just say a few words about how you came to discover what's happening, not just in the skies, but sort of on the Earth, if you will, as well.
It was really the shift happened when I became pregnant with my son. And then that process is, going through the, how do I give birth? What's the hospital system like? I was the first of my single friends to get pregnant. So I was learning really quickly, what is this all about? What do I have to do? And then after having my son, it was learning about sort of the revolving doors between industry and regulatory agencies and sort of the corruption with money and how regulatory agencies would, fast track certain things to market to benefit, their the industry, that they would eventually then leave their post at like the CDC or the EPA and then go work for the same chemical corporation or pharmaceutical corporation that was financing, anyway, they would line their pockets this way. So conflicts of interest are what I started realizing after having my son, because I was blindly trusting to all
Mm.
the things the white coats told me I had to do.
And how many years ago was this?
I had him about 11 years ago.
Okay.
And before that, I was footloose and fancy free. I was a corporate jet flight attendant. So I'm very familiar with the private jet airports and
Okay.
pilots and the tail numbers and registration numbers. And so that was really the first time I had a chance to stand still. And it was after having my son, I became a full-time homemaker, right? So I switched from globe trotting to then being home with a baby. And suddenly when you have a child, as you know, I think, you start seeing the world through their eyes and you start revisiting everything through their eyes. And so I became an observer of our world and the world around us. And that was actually my first also observation of the skies, sitting on the lawn with my toddler and you're watching the clear blue skies in the morning and then you see the grid patterns above you. And then you watch the grid patterns, fill out and turn the sky essentially white.
And am I right in thinking that you're on the West Coast in what Alana Freeland calls the cloud factory?
Probably, I've not read her books, but I've heard wonderful things about her. I think
Mm.
she's on point.
Yeah.
Possibly California.
Yes.
So
Okay.
at the time, I was in Fresno, the Fresno area, which is already heavy in agriculture, pesticide spraying, and everything else. The air quality was really bad. That's one of the reasons that we decided to relocate to the coast. So we moved to Santa
Oh,
Cruz.
okay.
So it's been an interesting journey for me. So
Yeah.
I remember though, I looked at the sky and then I mentioned it to a cashier and I'd never, I wasn't into any conspiracies or conspiracy theories. And I just mentioned it because it was so bothersome to me, to a local cashier at a health food store. And I said, do you see what's happening in the skies?
Mm.
And that's when she said, oh, those are chemtrails. So that was the beginning of the geoengineering journey for me.
Mm.
And I researched the term, I stumbled into Dane Wigington, and then I started to become a little educated. Now, at the time, when I would share this on social media, my observations, I was mocked and teased and told I was a moron. So I stopped. And then, of course, I'm raising a child, and I'm learning so much as I go. As a new mother, I didn't have a support network, so I thrust myself into the medical system that we know now that I'm trying to stay away from, and I had a lot of learning along the way. And in 2020 is when things really came to a head for me, and we saw what was happening with, I call it COVID and the fear, and that was the first time it really hit me just how hard these agencies have been working to instill fear in us to get us to onboard to whatever they want us to do next, whether it's to accept the bioweapon jab or it's to, get us to take their products or to behave a certain way. And it was during these years that I finally understood just the adversarial system we were truly up against. And it was after a couple of years of fighting, for our rights to refuse the experimental products. And then we relocated again to the mountains and to be closer to family. And that was when, as I'm building a garden, I decided I want to grow my own food. I want to get some chickens. I want to get away from the corrupt, toxic food system, the surveillance cameras, the 5G towers, all the city, feeling. And that was when I really got to see. I'm outside working, 10-hour days, and I saw the same thing. I almost felt like where I moved to in the mountains was under worse assault. And so that's when I decided I'm done not talking about this, because you were ostracized. Like during 2020, I was outspoken about my concerns with the EUA products and the experimental liability free products. And people would say to me, don't talk about the geoengineering or the skies, because you'll lose your audience and you have such an important message. So it was roughly maybe 2.5 years ago now, that I decided I'm done not talking about it, and I don't care what people think anymore. And I started a California chemtrail channel on Telegram because it sounded catchy. And I thought it's time for Californians to start watching the skies. And for those who felt ostracized or uncomfortable about speaking about what they were observing, I wanted to make a space where we could all discuss, explore, and document and look for patterns together. So that, in a nutshell, is sort of, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know any of that.
Oh, okay.
And before we go any further, maybe let our viewers and listeners know where they can find your work.
Absolutely, yes. So I was, as you know, put into prison on Facebook, YouTube, and so I left all of those platforms. I'm no longer on those mainstream platforms. I have a half-hearted X account. Where you can really find my work is on BitChute, bitchute.com/mellow, MELLOWKAT. It's Mellow Kat. So the joke is, I'm not mellow. I'm very intense. I'm very passionate. I have a lot of heat, and so it was a joke from my friend. He said, you should call yourself Mellow Kat.
You've answered that question now too.
Yeah. And then Substack is where I've started doing Substack, I think in the last maybe 5 months, 6 months or so. I lose track of time these days, but that is where I love. I can put, videos, multiple videos, and then have some text to explain a little bit more, and I can put all my links and resources for the readers. And so if you go to Substack, I'm also Mellow Kat there in Substack as well. And I have been documenting now since 2020. I decided, my son was very young when this all went down, and I was fighting for him. He never wore a mask. He had one nasal swab ever, that was for the travel. And so I'm very proud of that. I fought very hard for my child not to have to be a part of the fraudulent 6-foot distancing, muzzling of society. And so I started documenting my experiences because it was so surreal, as you probably recall. I mean, the signage, the messages. You would go in the grocery store, you had arrows on the ground, dots on the ground, and then you wear your mask when you stand up, and then when you take it off, you could take it off to eat at a restaurant. I mean, it was so absurd that I documented everything. And so then also I would share my thoughts. Sometimes I would rant, but I'd share my concerns, and then also my research. So my BitChute, I have, maybe 600 videos that people can just skim through and decide what they want to see if they want to learn about me. But my Substack now is a little more organized, and I cover a variety of topics. I'm interested in a lot of things because I observe the world around me. And believe it or not, folks, you don't have to look over there, and look at the problems that are sort of out of your control, because so much has already trickled down to your own backyards. So one of the things I've really been trying to do is to get people to understand their power, because I've learned now over the years that I've been fighting and speaking out, despite all of the confrontation that I experienced. I had police called for me to kick me out of grocery stores because I refused to wear a mask over and over and over again. At one point, I was hosting protests. I was known to have a bullhorn. I marched a group of angry parents through the superintendent's office because they refused to listen to us on their stupid Zoom meetings. And so I was very proactive, and I was then thrown under the bus and targeted by some local paper or some local online agency. And once you kind of live through that, and you've said no, and if you've been faced off with, angry mobs, you can do anything. I will never again sacrifice my dignity, I guess you would say.
Yes, I'm reminded of our dear friend, Dr. Matthias Desmet in Belgium, who wrote The Psychology of Totalitarianism.
Yes.
And his number one solution to what he calls a mass formation is psychosis. Yeah, although that was a term, I guess, Dr. Malone added.
Okay.
Matthias prefers mass formation, but the number one solution is to simply courageously, respectfully speak out
Yes.
hold your ground,
Yes.
and shake the foundations of the fear. Um,
Absolutely.
and you're in such good company, Kat. You're probably familiar with the Californian Rosalind Peterson.
I am. I was amazed that there were people fighting for so many decades
So
before I even woke up to this. So
Exactly. I curated Rosalind Peterson's archives after she died, and I spent a year immersed in her work at our geoengineering age. And I think of her as the Rachel Carson
yeah.
of the geoengineering conversation, in the same way that Rachel Carson blew the whistle in the
Yeah.
1960s on the chemical industry.
Yes.
Um, you and Rosalind and so many others are blowing the whistle on what we call at OGA our planet's most pressing, if underreported, global environmental issue, which is geoengineering. And it's not just the so-called trails in the sky, but it is a multi-pronged phenomenon, let us
Yeah.
say. And I love that you bring up the white coats and what I call the COVIDtopian moment, because
Yeah.
all of these things, of course, are interrelated.
Intersected. That absolutely
Yeah.
no. And you just touched on it's not just the lines in the sky, but then you find out that they're doing insect drops. Then you find genetically engineered insects, and then you
Yes.
find out that they're spraying people with toxic adulticides, which are organophosphate pesticides.
Mm.
And of course, it's always couched in this, it's for your health and your safety,
Yeah.
right? And so we are literally being poison from the food to the air to the water. And now granted, we're strong, and I hate the word resilient because it's been stolen by the United Nations, but we are really truly versatile beings.
Mm.
And if you take good care of yourself, also your mental and spiritual health as well, there's a lot that we can get through. But I'm trying but for me it was realizing that I can people can run away from the state that's causing harm, or they can try to go off grid or grow their own food, but you can't stop it when they are doing the aerial assaults over your home. And so that's where I really became active in fighting this and exposing it.
Yes, and can you talk about? I think you've kind of come into prominence, let's say, over the
Mhm.
past few months with your willingness and your campaign to confront
Yeah,
pilots. Can you speak a bit about that?
absolutely. Well, there was a post that went viral. So it's not my first pilot confrontation, I'll tell you that. So what I've decided to do, because I've become so frustrated with how everybody appears to be waiting for somebody to save the day or solve it for them. I've been tracking flights now for about 5 years. It's taken me years I'm self-taught. And I've learned to identify the aircraft that are over my head, and I can tell whether it's commercial, military, or private jet. Then I've taken it a step further. I can research the LLCs or the shell companies that they're hiding behind. I make phone calls all the time. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I've called even oh, well, anyway, I've called everybody to find out, what are you doing? What are you doing here? What's this tail number doing here? So I have tracked previously. What really got me to end up driving to the airport was, I'll tell you my first experience. I had learned that they were spraying people with the adulticides I mentioned. Okay. And they were saying, well, we want to protect you from West Nile virus because birds are dying. And the irony is that, so they had some spray alerts. So the local mosquito vector control districts sometimes it's tucked away in their website, but you can look for their spray alerts. And I got the map for where they would be spraying and the time that they would be spraying. And it's not wide public knowledge. You have to look for it and be
Mm.
interested in it. So I then hovered over the map and I waited for the aircraft. And I'm so familiar with patterns, the altitude, the patterns of their trails. And so I found the aircraft, and it was hidden behind a Delaware trust company. Okay. So we couldn't figure out who it was. I couldn't
Mm.
figure out who it was.
Mm.
And so that irked me. And then what really lit a fire under my butt was watching this aircraft at 450 feet going over an ecological reserve, which is meant to protect wildlife and birds. And when you learned about the active ingredients, so what they were spraying was a product called dibrom, Dibrom. And when you look into that, you then learn about the active ingredients. Sort of like Roundup, you have glyphosate. With dibrom, it's naled or naled. I still haven't figured out whether it's tomato. So when I looked into that active ingredient, I realized just how toxic it was for not only our bees, which help us grow food, but butterflies and aquatic life and birds. And this aircraft was flying over water, flying over towns and city, or, schools, farms, but then over the ecological reserve where these species are supposed to be protected. And I thought, how dare they? How dare they say they're doing this to protect us because birds are dying when they're actively poisoning the birds. They're actively poisoning the bees. They're poisoning us. Even NALED is not good for humans. Okay, so, and you can look into it. I would encourage everyone to look into the health effects of NALED. So that was it for me. That was the first time I decided I'm going to confront him. And now this air pilot had been coming out of the Sacramento McClellan Airport, which is 2 hours from my house.
And sorry, how many years ago was this? Just to place
This
some
was
time.
recent. This was last year.
Okay, thank you.
And I decided I was going to track him down. The next time, he was scheduled to spray, I was going to go out there. And I thought, well, it's 2 hours from my house. And so I'm going to try to catch him before he gets on the plane, right? So I drove out by myself. I had printed out a 3-page summary. I put links and resources and snippets from articles that I wanted the pilots to be aware of, because I thought, I don't know, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't know the harms they're causing. I'm sure they don't, but just because, they're told by a rep or, their company leaders that this is safe and effective, right? That's so typical. So I printed out, it was like a 3-page document to hand to the pilots. And I drove to the airport. And by the time I got to the airport, it's a small little airport. I saw his transponder turn on Flight Radar, which is the tracking website that I use. And I went, shoot. So I sat there for a couple of hours and I had to wait for him to come back. And of course, I'm by myself. The parking lot starts to get dark. There's security outside and I'm sitting there in this dark car in the parking lot waiting. And there's sheriff's helicopters. And of course, I get a little paranoid wondering, if anyone knows that I'm there. Yeah. And finally he comes in and I had this moment. I didn't know what I was going to do. This is the way it is for me. I'm very impulsive, spontaneous, but I'm also like, I have to do something. I don't know how it's going to go, but I have to do something. So when he came in and landed, I decided, okay, you've been here for now, 5 hours or so? So you need to get out of the damn car and go confront this guy. And so I got out, I filmed, throughout the night, I was filming in the parking lot, I was filming, and then I filmed him pulling in. And I didn't know what to do, but I had my papers in my hand and I decided, well, I'm going to hit record and I'm going to just walk up and film him as, So I went to the FBO, which is the fixed base operations. It's for the small airport or the small, it's where the pilots come and go if they need to come through. And I saw a line guy outside. And so I reached out, I said, hi, does this, tail number come through here? Does the crew come through here? I've got some paperwork for them. And ultimately he said, yeah, come on inside. And I went in and lo and behold, and I'm going to keep some details private because, it's to each their own, at your own risk. You can't just barrel onto the tarmac. You have to be invited. You have to get permission. Okay. So of course I went in with a smile and I said, hi, I'm here to give some paperwork to the crew. And then I ended up getting to go out onto the tarmac to meet him. And he was a so it was, I got, and it worked out beautifully. So I got to walk out onto the tarmac. I even have a little clip where I'm like, here I am, I'm walking out. And then I didn't want to appear confrontational. So I just recorded the conversation because sometimes things come up and you don't know how it's going to go. You don't know if you're going to get a threat. You don't know if you're going to get some information that you maybe forget because I have so much swimming in my head. I have to document. So I recorded that conversation as well. And I'm glad I did because why I went there was to, number one, find out who is this man or these pilots. It was one man. He'd been doing this for I think 20 years or so. And come to find out he worked for a mega chemical corporation. And he was told by the PhD scientists and the reps that what he was doing was absolutely safe and effective. Now, during our conversation, and he said, we've got this calibrated so it only kills mosquitoes. And I said to him, how do you know you're not killing bees? And he said, well, I spray them all the time. And then he actually said to me, he said, do you want to hear something that'll really make you freak out? Something along those lines. And I said, yeah. And he said, they used to spray this during World War I as a nerve agent. And I went, do you see? That's, so for me, that was very, yeah.
How do you explain, so 20 years this guy has been doing this. How do you explain the cognitive dissonance here?
I think when you're collecting a paycheck and it's an easy gig, you just get in your plane, you hit the nozzles and you just do your loops and you get to come home, and I don't know what he's making, but he's probably paid pretty well.
Yeah.
He sounded like he was married. But I think they are living apart from their spouses while they do this. So he's not even from the area. I forget now where he said he was from, but an affable guy, just absolutely clueless. And I think it's easier to believe that what you're doing is harmless because it's a paycheck. It's a job.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds very Hannah Arendt banality of evil. And again, not accusatory here, but just thinking through how humans justify their actions.
I
And
think it happens much more than we think it does.
well, that was my next question. So here's this guy flying one plane out of this one airport, doing this for 20 years,
Yeah.
deploying, what apparently is toxic poisons over, preserved areas.
Yeah.
Um, how did it play out the end of the conversation for us? How'd it go?
Well, he was pretty convinced that what he was doing was harmless, and he even had a couple of chuckles. And I have shared that on my Substack. I did share that conversation, and I said, well, it sounds like you know what you're doing. And I said, I have these concerns, so please give this a read. And so I gave him my handout because I didn't want to get into an argument about who
Yeah.
was right or wrong. I heard him. He really felt like he was informed. So I thought, well, you've got my handout now, and now you can read more, and hopefully that would inspire him to look into it a little more carefully. And the fact that he's working for a chemical corporation, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. He even, well, I could go on and on. He even
Yeah.
said, I said, why are you spraying? And he said, well, Dr. Fauci was just hospitalized with West Nile. And I went, come on, do you really believe that?
Right.
And so he kind of laughed. But yeah, it was really interesting for me to I think the first step for me is to just to notify them. I'm aware of what you're doing. I have these concerns. Have you looked into this? And I'm not there to fight or to get the police called on, or security called. I'm there to really try to reach them.
Well, and what you've done, Kat, I think, has performed such a valuable service for so many of us who have had a hard time answering this question: who is doing this?
Yeah.
Like, we have so many of the other pieces of the puzzle put together,
Yes.
but this question of A, who's doing it, and B, motive, you're shedding light on just a small but important, I think, portion of that. Can you say just a few words about how anyone can use Flight Radar?
Yes, so I would recommend you don't download the app. You don't need the app. You can go to flightradar24.com. I would recommend that you do it in a browser. So you could do it on your computer or on your phone. I find the computer is easier to navigate, but I use my phone all the time when I'm outside and I hear somebody. And it's overwhelming to see how many flights there are everywhere. But if you just find yourself on a map, zoom in on the map, and then the aircraft will start to disappear, and you'll then find specifically who's over your home or your business or your work. And that way, and then what you do is you'll tap. And by the way, let me tell you, I have a tutorial on how to use Flight Radar. If you go to my Substack, it's called My First Zoom, How to Read Flight Radar, something like that. And I'll share it with you in the links we could post later. But so you get on the Flight Radar, you can then tap on the aircraft, and there is a way to look for their unique registration number. Now, that said, something that's come up, and we'll talk about it, is that now the company that I've been tracking is now hiding their registration number. Somehow they know we're onto them because this thing went so viral. This is the cloud seeding operation that's been happening for also 30 years over our heads, unbeknownst to my local representatives. But the heat's on because I've exposed the companies and the players. I've put out their emails and their names, and because they've stonewalled me essentially. So the company that's been doing the weather modification in our area is called Weather Modification Inc. or International or LLC. They use all three. And so that was, I lost track a little bit there, but sometimes it might be hidden. But what you can do is if you catch them in a live flight, you can follow the trail back to where they took off, and you can watch them land. And typically with these sorts of flights with adulticide spraying, they'll travel out somewhere, do their spray, and then they'll come back to the same airport and park. Same thing for the cloud seeders. They're in and out of the Modesto airport, which is about an hour away from me. So that was my second pilot confrontation. And that is the one that exploded. And that was really unexpected for me and a little overwhelming, actually, because I sometimes I use choice language. I've vented in the past. I've said some pretty nasty things. I thought, oh no, all this attention on the, but what was thrilling for me was that it had such a positive response. Because previously, as I told you, I was doxxed. And so I was not liked in my county. In fact, some of my friends who are also doxxed had trouble getting work. I'm very, very thankful and fortunate for my family for supporting me. But
Mm.
it was wonderful to see just how many people were excited by it. And I hope that people understand that you can confront these people that are causing harm, the local minions taking the blood money, I like to say, firmly and politely, and you can bring them information. And in a way that is sort of putting them on notice. You're giving them the information in the event they don't have it. You're challenging them to read it and to address your
Mm.
concerns. And that's the very first step, I think, is it's kind of that's the step I choose to take. Though when I vent, I like to vent about all the other things I wish would happen. But but this is the way I've chosen to do it. And I feel like, well, I mean, look at what I've seen now is more and more people are watching the skies. I have people in my community that are keeping their eyes on the skies, and more people have been reaching out to me and saying, how do I do it here? And how do I do it? So it's wonderful.
It is wonderful. We're seeing the same thing in Vermont, where we're based, and all over the country. We're hearing from people who are really taking an active interest. And you really, Kat, building on the work of the late great Rosalind Peterson, and others who are not um, simply standing by idly.
Yes.
So have you? So pilot respectful confrontation,
Mhm.
flight radar 24 with your
Yes.
tutorial. Have you thought or considered how we might build kind of a peaceable army of
Mm.
respectfully confrontational sky defenders?
Ooh, that's
Um,
a good
because
question.
and I've been asked this question quite a bit, particularly in the past couple months,
Yes.
in part fueled by what you've been up to. What's your take on that?
Here's my take. So it's easier if you can bring it to the hyper local level.
Yes.
So I need to find people in Modesto, surrounding counties, Calaveras, Tuolumne, where I live. This is where we need to build our network of people who are willing to band together. They don't even have to say anything, but to start now going to these meetings
Mm,
and en masse. Like
yes.
with a crowd of people, you're going to make a bigger impact than just one person standing up for 3 minutes in front of your supervisor saying, I have a concern.
Mm,
So I have plans now because people have come out of the woodwork. Now, I've been so focused at home. I'm raising chickens. I've been hatching chicks now after the whole bird flu scamdemic stuff started brewing. I went, oh
yes.
gosh, I'm gonna hatch some more birds, and they're all healthy. They're all unjabbed. They're all beautiful, rich eggs we have, and
Bright orange
um,
yolks. Yes.
yes,
The
yes,
best.
that like you can hold and wiggle and almost pull, and
Oh, the best.
no, it's luscious. And no, so I'm doing all that I can. And so I'm mostly a homebody. I love to be home, and so I don't get out that much. So what's nice is that now people are coming out of the woodwork, and I'm starting to build a local team of people. So now we're going to get a lot more done. It doesn't feel so lonesome because I feel like I've been running on the hamster wheel for years, fighting this, fighting this, fighting this, and I'm by myself. And sometimes I get disheartened, like people don't really seem to care, or they're too busy, or there's so much other news that we're inundated with. So what I would wish for people is that they could focus on the hyper local. Like, what can you change in your own backyard? That's where you're going to make the biggest impact. So what I would say is it would be smart for people who are passionate. Look for, do you have a Telegram group? Do you have a local group on social media that is concerned about these things? And if you notice comments where people say, well, I'm in Florida, or I'm in Tennessee, or wherever you might be, then start to band together and have a place that you can all connect and make contact. And then all of you can start looking in your respective areas in your state or your county, however small you wish to go. And you're going to get a lot more done that way, because then you have your own local representatives, the county representatives, so that's a way that I would get started. And learn how to read the skies, learn how to identify aircraft, look for patterns. It does take some time because I still have people that see like a little joyride, like a Cessna. And I said, well, this is likely a joyride or a flight school because here's why. And so there are very distinct patterns you can learn to look for. And in fact, I do plan on having more tutorials in the future for those who have tried to use flight radar and have questions still, because then that way we can just hammer it out and I can show you the consistent, usually the seating patterns are figure eights. And then you've got the adulticide patterns, they're usually flying around 450 feet and they're doing the zigzag patterns. And so there are many ways to start understanding what you can ignore and what you might want to focus on to look
Yeah,
for patterns. So
yeah. I almost feel like a manual, like a little manual.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah,
definitely, yeah, please send along the tutorial, the link to
I
the
will.
tutorial, because we'll definitely include
Absolutely.
that here in the show notes. And you're building on such powerful legacy here. And California seems to me a really important state to do this in part because the West Coast is ground zero for this ongoing sort of operation that has been decades long. Our nuclear geochemist in our OGA team, J. Marvin Herndon, Dr. Herndon, who just left San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
After
Yeah.
40 years, he ran an independent lab there. He's now retired. He's on the East Coast, but and we've documented kind of this assault on
Yes.
all living things in California
I
for
feel like his name
decades.
is very familiar to me. I'll have to look. Yeah.
Yeah, he was just part of that international symposium on geoengineering with the Swiss a couple weeks ago.
Very cool. And
Um,
by
um,
the way,
yeah,
speaking of that, they were talking about the spider silk, right? The so-called
yes,
spider silk. That's another thing you'll find in my Substack. So this fell in California, and it was like these 20-foot long strands just stretching and falling from the sky. And again, everyone, people just don't stop anymore to take a look or to document. I would love for people just to start observing and document it because you have a timestamp. You never know when that's going to come in handy. But I decided that was another adventure I had to collect samples. I caught it from the sky, and I saved it and I didn't know what to do with it, but I thought, this is so bizarre. I want to know what this is. And so I had samples, and then I had a few friends that play with, dark field microscopy, I guess is what you call. I'm not,
correct.
I don't know
Yeah,
what the terminology is, but they looked at the spider silk and it did not appear to be spider silk, but we don't know what it was, but there appeared to be crystalline tubes with fluid in them. And so when I heard about what they were doing in, the European Union or the Swiss scientists, I went, well, that makes sense. And had we all been collecting samples, we would have more data and things to observe together. So please, everyone, document, collect samples sometimes, even if you don't know what to do with them. If you take some soil and put it in a jar, label the date and time that you collected it, the location. I was doing rain samples. I was testing my rain. I was just inspired by Dane Wigington. I thought, well, he had his samples taken over there. I want to know what's falling in my area because, again, I started a garden and I wanted to know what is falling on my plants, right? Why are my trees falling over? I had some oak trees that were just falling over. And I was like, what is causing this? Now, there might be an answer or a solution or a reason, but those are the sorts of things I'm looking into right here. And it keeps me busy. I'm like full time, in my own backyard. Again, like what's happening here in my county. If we can bring it home, I think we're going to be much more effective.
yeah, I love that. And you're describing, I think, with those spider
Oh,
silk filaments, what we're calling self-assembling polymer nanoparticulate nanobots.
delivery mechanisms.
Yeah, building on the work of the great Clifford Carnicombe
Yes.
here in Santa Fe, who's now retired, but
Yes.
he's kind of passed the torch on all of this research to Dr. Anna up in
Yes.
Washington, Alana Freeland, who we mentioned
Yes.
earlier, um, the Swiss, the Spanish, La Quinta Columna in
Yes.
Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's emerging, I think, a global interest in collaborating on all of this.
There is a shift happening,
Yeah,
most definitely, and it's
and
really exciting to see. And
it is no better time than now.
no better time than now. I know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm so relieved because I felt like I was banging my head against the wall for
Mm,
years trying to reach people. Talking, all the many things that are changing in our world, and it is all interconnected, right? It's the surveillance network. It's the Internet of Things and bodies. It's the facial recognition. They have the smart dust for agriculture. They've got the pills to give to the cows so they can keep track of their temperature and where they are. And they've got these, it's sending signals to the Bluetooth, right? It's wild to see where this is going. And then you
it's
have Bill
yeah.
Gates talking about, well, we solved the issue of vaccine hesitancy by putting vaccines in food. And,
What
it's
could
so
possibly go
insane.
wrong? What could possibly go
What
wrong?
could
Yeah,
possibly, well,
yeah.
and then you have the NIH, though. This is what concerns me. And I have an old video I took where clearly they're talking about aerosolizing vaccines. The NIH recently spent roughly $5 billion to explore aerosolizing the COVID vaccines. And we know that, there's all sorts of delivery mechanisms. DARPA has talked about insects being vectors to genetically modified plants. That Bill Gates is now heavily invested in that UK biotech company, which now wants to spread throughout the United States because they have multiple insects, moths, worms that are genetically modified, CRISPR engineered to do whatever you want them to do. So I wouldn't trust Bill Gates's mosquitoes as far as I could, swat them.
Yes.
All these things. And so I'm keeping my eye on all of it. And let me also say to your viewers too, that it was a couple of years ago that they tried to release those mosquitoes, the Oxitec mosquitoes in California. And I spent weeks agonizing over what I was learning about their previous releases around the world. So they did it in the Grand Caymans, Brazil, India, and roughly 2 years after they had released in those countries, what actually happened was disease, or the tests, or the rate of disease skyrocketed. So clearly what they were promising was, we're going to help fight disease spreading mosquitoes. And what happened after they released those mosquitoes was much more disease, like 600% increase in dengue in both India and Brazil, which told me this really is not about public health. This is actually, in my opinion, I'll just say it, I think it is about creating more avenues to spread illness so that they can give you their fraudulent diagnostic tests and then tell you what solution or intervention they need you to take. That's what I believe now. It is, so we have to be very mindful. But my point being, what I find very effective is reaching out again to the local minions. What I did was I found out the mosquito vector control district manager, whose name was Mustafa Debon, and I called him directly because he was quoted as being excited about partnering with Oxitec. And I had emailed him several times. He blew me off. So I got a hold of him finally. And I documented the whole thing, and I shared his name, number, email to everywhere. And I asked him, I said, are you aware of what's previously happened with their previous releases? And he said, well, talk to the EPA. He couldn't be bothered. He didn't really know. He didn't really want to know. He just knew that the EPA approved it. And so he's going to do the partnership. And I put him on the spot. And then, thanks to people that were passionate, I put together a very lengthy summary of my concerns. I had links, resources, and we had an opportunity to leave public comment for the California Department of Pesticide Regulation prior to this experimental use permit, prior to the release. We had over 5,400 emails of opposition. Oxitec had to quietly withdraw their research application, and they went away for the time being. But now I'm noticing, I'm listening to some of their meetings, the CDPR meetings, and they're trying to, if you hear it in your county, sustainable pest management, please keep your ears to it, because that is the term they're using for this. They're saying, oh, instead of pesticides, which, by the way, they're not going to stop using pesticides. That's too profitable. But they want to then have an excuse to release these genetically engineered mosquitoes. And once they do, there's no going back. So
yeah,
but we were able to stop it back in 2022.
Yeah,
which is great.
That is great. It's a critical time. Have you been in touch with Californian Renette Senum?
I have. In fact, she was really instrumental in, it says my internet connection's unstable.
You're flowing okay.
She was one of the few I reached out to, the High Wire. I reached out to Children's Health Defense, and they are, of course, busy with many things, but she brought me on to talk about this. She brought me on to share with everybody, please reach out and leave a comment of opposition. And then also she was wonderful in when I was researching a carbon capture scam, again funded by Bill Gates in my own county, where, and really quickly, they cut down our trees, truck them to Nevada, bury them in earthen vaults, and then sell the supposed carbon credits back to big industry like Alphabet, which is Google, Meta, Stripe, so on and so forth. So she brought me on for that as well. So she was wonderful in giving me a platform to share, because I was a nobody, right? I was just a passionate person spinning around. And so she gave that platform to me to be able to share my findings with everybody. So yes, I have been in contact with her.
Good. Yeah, she seems like the real deal, and she has very powerful political acumen, I would say.
Yes.
Can I ask you about your take on kind of the state of the geoengineering community in the United States? I'm beginning with Rosalind Peterson. I mean, you're building so beautifully, Kat, on her work and collaboration, and so many of the things that you are doing, I think Rosalind and others have kind of pioneered, but it's important for this generation, if you will, to pick up the torch.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard you in the past couple of weeks be a bit critical of a couple of, I would say, go-to
Mm-hmm.
authorities here in the United States on the subject of geoengineering. Maybe we could start with Climate Viewer.
Okay. Um, there has been a lot of that has transpired over the last few weeks.
Mm.
Um, let me say for folks something that I think is really important. What I'm finding with a lot of NGOs and a lot of people with large platforms is that they are making a lot of promises, but nothing's really getting done. And sometimes when you offer a solution like a lawsuit, and I've seen this across the board with so many different issues, they say, donate, we need your support to fight this in the court. Okay. So everybody donates, and then nothing comes of it. You have people promising that they're going to expose it, and there's going to be another meeting, or so what I want to say is wait for no one. Do not wait for a politician or a lawyer or an NGO to solve this problem for you. If you care about what's happening, no matter what the issue is, carbon capture scams, mosquitoes, geoengineering, adulticide spraying, you are responsible for getting to the bottom of who you can speak to directly on the county level, on the city level, on the state level. And you and your peers are responsible for doing something about this, because what I feel has been happening is we've been placated by promises, and we have been rendered inactive because we have hope that somebody else is going to do the elbow work for us. We all need to put in the elbow grease, all of us. And I understand that not everybody is comfortable with confrontation, but what you can help do in your community is identify the players. You can maybe work on writing letters or templates for people so that they can, if people are too busy to write their own letter or email of opposition, you can then draft the letter and share that with people. There is so much you can do, but please don't wait. And what I will say is that I have sort of stepped away from these organizations. I march to the beat of my own drum. I feel like sometimes we can be led forward on a promise for something, and then nothing happens. And then there's a whole new activity that's like, here's a new idea. We're going to now do this. And then, no, now we're going to now do this. And so we're sort of still spinning and waiting. And I want to say that you don't have to wait. You can write. And I feel there's so much power. It's very empowering when you can speak how you're feeling and your truth to the people that are causing the harms. And you don't have to be eloquent, you don't have to be an expert, but to be able to see someone face to face and to say, I'm really upset about this and I don't like it. And what can we do about this? I want this to stop. And you give them a chance to respond. That is where you're going to make a difference. And a lot of these people on the local level get to hide behind the organizations or the offices. We need to start identifying who they are and make contact. Nothing is more powerful than going in person to look at somebody in the face, shaking their hand, getting to know who they are. Everyone likes to say, oh, the county supervisors are terrible. They're not doing anything. Well, you need to go meet with them. They have a lot of bureaucracy and baloney falling on their heads, and they're just trying to keep up with all of it. They need your support too. They need you to show up. They need you to bring your expertise or your research or your feelings, your opinions to them in a polite, firm way and say, I want to do something about this. How do we address this? And then start that conversation. Please, everybody, I would actually say you don't need to donate to anybody. Donate into your own garden. Donate to secure your home. Donate to yourself, get yourself some chickens, or maybe build that coop that you have never tried, done before, or in the community coop or the neighborhood coop or whatever. We have got to invest in your neighbors and your community, the people touch, can hug, and interact with. We don't need to give our money anymore to NGOs that are promising big promises, because I think I've seen this long enough now, about 5 years now, where I haven't really seen a lot of change. Right. And I've been feeling increasingly frustrated with the promises of there's going to be arrests. This is going to be solved. Everything will be glorious again. It's golden and it's amazing. And if you just sit back and wait, people are doing this for you behind the scenes. And that is the greatest disservice to humanity yet.
Yeah, so well said. And I want to maybe end with solutions here in a moment. But, my joke with some of these geoengineering organizations is to be found in the title. Like we have climate viewer,
Sure.
right? And
Yes.
I want to credit Jim Lee with building what I think is probably the most comprehensive historical timeline about weather and climate modification. It's a powerful resource. I'm a historian. I appreciate that. However, right, viewing
Yes.
climate change, or the other one would be Geoengineering Watch,
Watch.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Fronted
Yes.
by a human who has proven to be the opposite of collaborative in every way,
Yeah. I
is
don't know him
not
I
all
don't
that
know.
helpful.
What I will say is, yes, they have databases that can be incredibly useful. Um, and I will say, I want to express one thing to be use some discernment here, because I want to say that this all ties together, and this is something I've been observing. I'm just going to put this out here. There's been a major push for this biomass. Okay, so this resilient
Mm.
forests, as you probably are aware, they're thinning forests now. They want 70 million acres to be thinned. They're promising us it'll help us with our fire resilience. It's all about, there is a goal by 2050 to put all of the airlines and also planes, trains, automobiles, I like to say, on biofuel. They call it synthetic aviation fuel, and they call it sustainable aviation fuel.
Mm.
So I know that they're very clever in the way that they can get us to onboard to their plans. Let me say something. This whole carbon capture scam that we're seeing, there's the Global Carbon Capture Institute, Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute, okay? The players behind the carbon capture scam are the same big oil, Rockefeller, Shell, Exxon, transnational corporations, and governments. Okay, they have created a market out of thin air with this carbon capture and storage baloney. And so they're not really worried about making the skies more clean and the earth more green. It's all about creating a new market, and it's the bait and switch. Oh, you realize that we're polluting? Okay, well, we're going to now sell you on a biofuel. Here's a green leaf in the logo so you feel really good about it. And I've referenced this before. The Rockefellers put on a big campaign to get everybody to recycle more. What they wanted was, they knew that people were concerned about the waste. And so they said, well, we're going to spend $50 million a year for several years, and we're going to push this recycling scam on everybody. We're going to make them feel really good about consuming more and more plastics, because then they just have to wash out their little plastics and sort it by the numbers, and then people won't stop buying plastic. Right? So they've lied to us time and time again. Be very mindful of who's behind the movement. The carbon capture scam is exactly what I said. It's a scam. So
Mm.
when people start saying, I've noticed they're like, oh, the FAA recognizes that they are polluting our skies and contributing to global warming. Well, when you actually read the contrail roadmap that they put out to everybody, all I see are no real solutions, just a nudge toward sustainable aviation fuel. We now need to ramp up the research into sustainable aviation fuel, which means they're going to continue doing research. And there's still more studies are needed. We still need to assess how the biofuels might improve this. It's just a new market. It's just a bunch of fluff and games. They're not really doing anything. So
Yeah, so important to follow the money, understand who's authoring the story, the narrative,
yes,
official or otherwise, and of
yes,
course, it was the Rockefeller-funded United Nations
yeah.
that brought us in the late 1970s the so-called Environmental Modification
Oh,
Treaty,
I know. It's all yes.
with that giant loophole that
Yes.
geoengineering for peaceful purposes is perfectly fine.
Right, right.
So yeah, it's
So yeah, so don't just watch and view. And sometimes, and
beautifully
also,
said.
we've got to keep it really simple. I've been trying to say this for a while. There's a lot of confusing narrative out there, and we're getting bombarded by a lot of different people's opinions. Let's just keep it simple. Start to identify who's flying over your area, and start there. Zoom in on your map every day. Go on. There's other apps you can use. Flight Radar is one. It's free. I
Mm.
use it. Okay.
Mm.
People use some exchange like ADS or some exchange, and use whatever you feel comfortable with. I had to learn. It takes some time, but then I can read it like the back of my hand. I can identify aircraft very quickly because I've just been doing it so frequently for the last 5 years. And I'm happy to help with tutorials. So please do stay tuned on my Substack. You can come on with questions. You can come on with pictures. You can come on with anything. I really want to empower people to become more aware of who's doing what in their own skies. And from there, you can then figure out next step, who's responsible, what agencies can I contact, and how do I go from there? Where do I do the Public Records Act requests?
I love that, and I'm so looking forward to helping helping us build out that roadmap, and maybe end with solutions. Raise your own chickens.
Yeah,
When we're breathing 20,000 times a day, close the mouth, bring the breath into the nose. That will actually sequester more carbon dioxide in our bodies, which is our body's most important respiratory gas, even though we're waging a war on it, which is absurd. And really build your community of like-minded citizens, consumers, humans. This is a team human moment, I think, for
it
us all.
is.
And
It's amazing what we can do when we step into that power as well. Thank
it
you.
is, yeah. Well, so appreciate your work, Mellow Kat on Substack.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Yes.
And
Awesome.
send us, yes, and send us any other links you think are important, and we will provide them all in the show notes here. And I hope we can talk again soon.
We will. I look forward to it. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Catherine.